Right, today we're going to be adding a couple topics to your notes for today. Major focus is going to be on likely versus unlikely and then also making predictions, but we will kind of drop back and just chat about independent versus dependent again as well. So the first topic that you want to go ahead and fill out in your math notebook and or pieces of paper where you've been taking your notes is likely versus unlikely. So when we talk about probability, probability basically goes along this continuum of a line that's right here, which goes from impossible, a 0% chance of happening or zero probability of it happening, all the way up to the spot which point where it's certain, which is 100%, or we get 1 out of 1 or 1 whole when we are talking about a fraction or a decimal here. So every single probability is going to fall somewhere between impossible to certain, no matter what it is. So we have in this realm down here above the 0% going up to the even chance here. And in an even chance, we're talking a 50% chance or a 1/2 probability or 0.5. So going up between this 0 to this 50%, we have the realm of what's called unlikely to happen. So we typically say it's unlikely because it's a less than 50% chance, less than a half chance of happening. So for example, if you're going to roll a number cube or a die here and you're trying to get the number, for example, 3, 1 out of 6 is your probability of getting that happening, and that's going to be down here in the unlikely category. As you move toward the top between 50 and 100, you get more into the likely category, which means that these things are more likely to happen than to not happen. So for example, there's an example here that you can see 4 versus the 1. If you're looking for green, you have a 4 out of 5 chance. 4 out of 5 would actually correlate to be about 80% then. Okay, so you're anywhere on this continuum of 0 to 100%. A couple more visual representations for you of what these look like. You can kind of see impossible. Likely would be like this section. Equally likely as not likely is about half here. Likely means that you're looking at like the 75% category, and certain means that it's definitely going to happen, 100%. One more kind of basic picture here for you. Very unlikely, they rate at below 20% here. Unlikely, they rate up here up to 0.4. Less likely than not is at this 0.5. And again, this is your tipping point, your halfway mark. More likely than not to happen, likely, and then very likely. Of course, still bounded by the impossible down at 0 and the certain up here at 100%. Independent versus dependent is your next topic. So go ahead, write that down in your notebook. And when we talk independent versus dependent, we discussed this the other day when we were talking about the two situations, like the fruit bowl where we picked the fruit out of it. We put it back and we said that that was independent versus when we took the fruit and we actually kept the fruit, which changed the fruit bowl, which therefore made it a dependent situation. So just a real quick recap here, if we have a spinner and then we have a die, are these going to be independent or dependent? So these actually are independent because whatever I get on the spinner has nothing to do with what's going to end up happening on the die. They have nothing to do with each other. So probability here, we simply just take the two probabilities, and because it's two probabilities, we multiply. So spinning a yellow, we get 1 out of 5, times getting a 4 is 1 out of 6, which gives us a probability of 1/30th of happening. And if we were to rate that as likely versus unlikely, sometimes it helps to actually change this to a percent. This is going to come in at just about 3%-ish. It's a little bit over at 3.3 repeating, so 3% here. If we were to do that, that is definitely going to be in the unlikely category of happening. Not to say that it cannot happen, it's just that it's not a very good chance of it happening. If that was what we specifically wanted, it's not a good chance of that happening. Going back to the twister spinner that we have here versus a quarter, if we were to spin the twister wheel and then flip a quarter, would you call that independent or dependent? If you said independent again, you would be correct. Looking at our spinner, remember we said it was divided into the 4 parts. So if we're trying to get a foot, that would be the right foot or the left foot. So this would actually be half of our spinner here. And then multiplying it by getting heads on the quarter, which would be half. So the probability of landing on a foot or and then landing on heads is going to be about 1/4, which is 25%. So still in that unlikely category, but definitely could happen. Next one, we have a container of gumballs here. We have 2 pink, 2 white, 4 blue, and 2 green. First thing you should do is to go ahead and add those up, knowing that there are 10 total here. And when we look at those 10, we are talking about without replacement. So do we have independent or dependent? We are going to take one of the gumballs and we are going to eat it. We're not going to replace it. If you said dependent, you would be correct, because if we actually eat the gumball, we've now changed the scenario. So probability of getting a green and then a white. So there are 2 green out of 10 gumballs. We eat the green gumball, so now there are only 9 left in the container, and now we want a white one. There are still 2 white ones in here, so we go ahead and we multiply, and we end up with 2/45 as our final answer here. And changing that just to a decimal, this is about a 4% chance, which would tell us, again, that this is going to be very unlikely for this to actually happen. Making predictions is your next topic for your notes. This is super simple, but a pretty easy thing to understand. So when we talk about making predictions here, we can actually use probability to predict what might happen if we kind of expand the sample size of what we're talking about. So for example, in this bag, we have 6 red marbles out of 20 total. So how many red marbles should be selected out of 100? So since we're focusing in on the red marbles, we are going to figure out what's the probability that we actually pick a red marble from the container to start. So we're going to say our probability is 6 out of 20. And you know that I do require you to reduce these, and if we do that, we get 3 out of 10. In order to make a prediction, you take the probability and then you multiply it by the larger sample size. So our probability was 3/10, and we're going to multiply that by 100. And if I do 3/10 times 100, I end up with 30 red marbles. Fact, when asking 50 people their favorite type of pants, the results are shown to the right. So we know that there's 50 people here. That's kind of nice. How many people out of 200 would vote for capris? So if we look at capris, we want to first figure out the probability of picking capris. 15 out of 50. Reduce, you're going to get 3 out of 10. So prediction, we're going to take our probability and we're going to multiply it by our larger sample size. We're trying to predict out of 200 people, how many would this be? So 3/10 times 200, you are going to have 60 people prefer capris. A survey found that 15% of people do not use emojis in their text messages. Predict how many of the 2,450 students at Washington Middle School use them. So if 15% of people do not use them, the probability that people use an emoji is 85%, or 0.85, which is going to be easier for us to use because to make our prediction, we take our probability and we multiply by the larger sample size. So 0.85 times 2,450, I get 2,082.5. But I can't have 0.5 of a person, so I go ahead and look at how many whole people I have, which is 2,082 people. That takes us to the end of our lesson for today. So just a real quick heads up of what your tasks are for today's class period. You have a class kick, 9L7. It's likely versus unlikely and predictions. So this is going to be graded for your completion there. You will notice that as you enter in your answers, numbers only unless it's a fraction that you're typing in, and then you use the slash. If you get to the predictions, don't worry about the labels, just type in your numbers. Things are going to show up green if you have them correct. You also have then 3 IXLs that are right here. These we are going to be going to a SMART score of 70 for today. And then we have any missing work that you have to do. And then I ask you to go back and review your notes on our probability chapter, because tomorrow we do have your probability quiz. So your homework for tonight in your assignment book, complete any classwork that's not done from today, including the class kick and the 3 IXLs. Your quiz tomorrow is on probability, and then a reminder that all missing work is due by Monday at 7 a.m. If you complete any of your missing assignments, you do need to email Mrs. Grabner, and you need to tell her exactly what it is that you accomplished. All right, so back here, if you want to screenshot this, if you need to jot this down, you want to go ahead and pause the video and do so.